York City, 10 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Stepping down, the pound weakening as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announces he will resign. Easing tensions, oil dropping slightly as Iran cites major progress after an all-nighter in terms of peace talks with the US. And stocks wavering ahead of a week full of key economic data, including personal spending and PCE. Also, a lot of Fed speak that will be parsed this week. But let's get first now to Europe and specifically London, where a lot's happened in the last 20 minutes. Justina Lee, how are markets reacting?
Yeah, we're monitoring how markets are reacting to the headline today that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has resigned. Now, it's probably worth mentioning here that this is not exactly a huge shock, but it might have come a bit earlier than expected after Andy Burnham won his special election last week. If we look at the pound reaction here, we can see it sliding on that headline earlier and kind of recovering a little bit over kind of the last few minutes here. Of course, it's also kind of worth mentioning here that it's generally been a day of dollar strength. And so I think some of that weakness is also reflecting that. Now, we flip the board here and kind of look at the rest of British markets. Now, we are seeing kind of the British, the more domestic index here, the FTSE 250, extending declines kind of after that headline, probably also reflecting some of that political uncertainty. Now, the long end gilt yield kind of rising just a little bit, 1 basis point, but that is kind of despite the fact that generally bond yields are falling across Europe today. And I think that kind of shows still kind of a lot of uncertainty over what Andy Burnham's fiscal position is. And again, like I mentioned, generally a day of dollar strength. And so we are seeing the euro sliding as well. And I think that kind of puts maybe a bit of that pound weakness in context and kind of generally showing that markets have priced in kind of this kind of political shock a little bit already. But of course, it all depends on, who Andy Burnham picks as chancellor, for instance, and what else he's going to say about kind of the UK's fiscal policy going forward, Bonnie.
And that's even assuming Andy Burnham is the next Prime Minister. Justina, thank you so much. We'll continue to monitor reaction and dig into some of the questions surrounding Keir Starmer's resignation in Britain. First, though, let's get over to Asia and see what's been going on overnight. Paul Dobson is with us. I noticed the yen has been weakening ever more, Paul.
Yeah, hi, Bonnie. Justina said it, a day of dollar strength. And keep all those eyes on the yen in Asia. We're getting ever closer to 161.95, which would be the trigger for the weakest level since the 1980s. I think that most of the forces coming through from the dollar side, people looking forwards to inflation figures later in the week, which may be high, ratcheting up those bets for the Fed to start tightening interest rates. And the pressure has been extreme across Asia's markets again today, but the jawboning for Japanese officials has not yet got us to red alert levels. And on the flip side of that, if you have a look at the equity market, the currency weakness is no bar to further gains there. It's all the tech story once again. You see record highs in the Kospi in South Korea, record highs in Taiwan, and across emerging market gauges as well. SK Hynix, really the biggest driver here, up for an 8th day and up over 5% again, and the huge rally that continues to take it to record highs. So that tech picture really driving Asia's stock markets again.
Absolutely. Paul, we'll see if it continues into the session today. Of course, we were off on Friday here in the United States, and there was a big sell-off globally, but we had a massive day on Thursday. First, though, I want to point to this bear flattener, which is still on. So we saw it post-FOMC. We're at about 27 basis points on the 2-10 spread. We have the 2-year yield up another 4 basis points, almost at 422 now, and we're higher across the curve, though again, less higher on the long end than on the short end. Obviously, inflation fears further out are much more subdued, and markets are pricing in some rate hikes potentially. Let's take a look at oil, because again, we had a little bit of a mixed message type of weekend. At the same time, seems to be positive going into Monday. We do, though, have Brent crude hovering above $79 a barrel and New York crude still around the $75 mark. And then if we look at those equities, it is a big week for semis. Of course, we finished Thursday with the SOX index up 6.5%. That said, there was a global sell-off Friday, so will we play catch-up to that sell-off, or will we start a new week, which also includes Micron earnings? The Nasdaq 100 futures want to be green this morning, not so much for the S&P 500. All right, let's get to some individual movers now. For that, we'll go back over to London and Chloe Melley.
Good morning, Vonnie. Getty Images shares are soaring this morning. We're up about 170% after the company announced a display partnership with OpenAI, which essentially means that this will bring the licensed content from Getty Images onto ChatGPT for more visual responses. And so that is really driving the stock very impressively this morning. Another huge mover has been Apogee Therapeutics, the biotech company, after the FT reported that the pharmaceutical giant AbbVie was nearing a deal to buy Apogee for about $11 billion. And so this is to gain access to the anti-inflammatory portfolio from that biotech company. And that is really driving those shares. We're up about 50% there. And finally, let's end with more M&A. And we've got another report from the FT about a CRH, the building materials supplier, closing in on a deal to buy its rival Arcosa in what would be its biggest ever deal. And so this is also really driving that stock this morning. And we're up about 12% for Arcosa.
Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there in London. And coming up this hour, we'll push ahead to a busy week of data and Fed speak with Monica Defend of Amundi Investment Institute. Let's get back to London, though. Prime Minister Keir Starmer stepping down.
The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer of my parliamentary party to that question, and I accept that answer with good grace. Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party.
Joining us now from London is Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden outside 10 Downing Street. Another resignation. What happens now, Lizzie? Is there a contest? And if Andy Burnham is the winner, or if he just becomes crowned Prime Minister, can he save Labour?
Well, Vonnie, if there is going to be a new Prime Minister, and there is, it'll be the 7th Prime Minister in 10 years, the 10 years since the Brexit vote. I was just metres away from Starmer when he was giving that speech, and it has to be said, that clip there doesn't quite convey the emotion here, because he had a microphone, but the music was blaring from the protester down the road. And later on in the speech, when he thanked his wife, he choked up a little bit. It really got emotional. His team was standing on the right to thank him, and the applause was really raucous as the Prime Minister stepped aside. So in terms of the detail that really matters here, as you say, it is not going to be a straight coronation for Andy Burnham, as some had expected after he won that Makerfield special election, the result coming in with a resounding victory on Friday. Instead, it's going to be a contest. And Keir Starmer, in that speech, saying that he's going to ask the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party to take nominations by the 9th of July so that the contest can take place over the summer, so that the next leader will be in post after that. And then we'll hopefully know what the policy of this next government is going to look like. Can they save Labour? Can they save the UK? It is going to be a very, very tall order, because whoever is the next occupant of number 10 Downing Street, they're going to face exactly the same fiscal bind that their predecessors, both Labour and Conservative, have faced. The bond market's putting pressure on Keir Starmer, just as they would Andy Burnham or Ed Miliband or Wes Streeting or Angela Rayner, whoever it may be. They'll be sandwiched between the bond market on the one hand and the left of the Labour Party on the other.
Can the next person find the 81 MPs they need? Who's most likely to be able to do that? Is it Andy Burnham? In which case, who does he already have around him in terms of advisors, Lizzie?
Well, Andy Burnham's been taking advice from a load of figures that we know well in British politics, the likes of Jim O'Neill, former Goldman Sachs economist, who he has a great relationship with from the Northern Powerhouse project here in the UK. Another Northerner, Andy Haldane, former Bank of England chief economist. Richard Hughes, former chair of the Office for Budget Responsibility. All of them, you would think, would help to guide him to being more market-friendly. Of course, the comment that we shouldn't be in hoc to the bond market in Westminster is something that has stuck, even if he has said that he would stick to the fiscal rules and that comment was misunderstood. But notably, these have been proponents of
changing the fiscal rules in order to get growth here in the UK. And that has been the real conundrum for this economy, that we haven't had growth of any substantial size in many years. That would be the key to unlocking the fiscal issues here in the UK. And so perhaps they'll be trying to push more radical ideas. But as I say, the bond market is going to constrain whatever they may be when it comes to implementing them.
Martin Wolf writing in the FT this morning, Lizzie, Starmer showed that conceding to old Labour instincts do not work. Labour does not believe incentives really matter. They do. Labour does not believe that high spending means higher taxes. It does. Will Burnham be brave enough to do things that haven't been tried before?
Well, we'll find out perhaps this afternoon. He's going to be sworn back in as an MP. He will be hearing from him this afternoon, UK time. Will he be brave enough? Well, we've seen many Burnhams over the years. He's had a very, very long political career, going back to the 1990s. He was a young rising star when it was the era of Blair and Brown. He continued under Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader, and then he took that rare step of going up north. He's a Liverpudlian, but he was the first mayor of Greater Manchester. And really, he has been associated with this concept of Manchesterism, which is associated with a public-private partnership. It's also about directing funds to the regions so that they can govern themselves to some degree, and taking utilities into ownership of those bodies. But is he going to be willing to do all of that if his whole policy has been about decentralisation, if he is at the centre of British politics? We'll find out hopefully over the summer which Andy Burnham would be PM Burnham.
Lizzie, what happens with the question of Europe? It seemed like Burnham was inching towards maybe having another conversation with Europe about Britain's position in relation to Europe, and then he maybe changed his mind.
If I can hear you correctly, Bonnie, you're asking about what will happen with the European Union relationship with the UK. And again, it's very difficult, just as with the bond market, where you're kind of within constraints. In terms of the relationship with Brussels, we're out of the EU. And Keir Starmer himself talked about having closer ties, but not about having a vote to get back into the European Union, because, of course, we'd be on very, very different terms negotiating with Brussels at this point. It has been argued by economists again and again that it would be beneficial to Britain's economic growth to have closer ties with Europe. But this has been something that Starmer's worked hard on. It was something that he was boasting about at that podium as one of his legacy achievements, that he's done trade deals and that he's worked on this. So the room for manoeuvre for Burnham, just as it is on the fiscal side, very difficult to see.
Lizzie, thank you so much. Lizzie Burden there, reporting once again live from Downing Street. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Trump-backed conservative lawyer Abelardo de la Espriella wins Colombia's presidential election preliminary count with 49.7% of the vote. The results signal a swing back to business-friendly and pro-US policies. The final confirmed result is expected toward the end of the week. Private equity fund investors are expecting more so-called zombie funds in their portfolios as deal-making remains muted. According to a survey by secondaries firm Collar Capital, more than half of investors say they expect zombie funds to proliferate in the next 2 years. That's compared to 28% of investors in 2024. Pixar's Toy Story 5 scores Hollywood's best opening weekend of 2026. It brought in $160 million in ticket sales in its debut weekend. Ticket sales were helped by strong reviews. The soundtrack also featured Taylor Swift's I Knew It, I Knew You. Up next, the latest from Switzerland as Iran hails progress in US peace talks. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. in Switzerland, Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi says overnight talks with the US have made major progress as mediators help alleviate tensions over Lebanon. US Vice President Vance had flown to Switzerland yesterday to lead Washington's delegation. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar joins us now from Dubai for more. Abir, Araghchi tends to take the more positive view of things, especially when he's speaking to the outside world, but it was a bit of a touch and go weekend. Why did Vance have to fly, it seemed suddenly, to Switzerland?
Good morning, Vonnie. Yeah, look, there were some disputes before those meetings had to take place. They were supposed to take place on Friday, if you remember, but then the attacks by Israel on Lebanon had delayed them, according to the Iranian side. But they did end up happening on Sunday and overnight into our morning, where we heard statements from Qatar and Pakistan. Those are the two sides that are mediating these talks. So in a joint statement, they said that the progress made was quite encouraging. And then as those negotiations happened, we started hearing from both the United States and Iran. And according to the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi on a post on X, he did say that the progress was tangible when it comes to Lebanon, a major sticking point for Iran to come to the negotiating table. And then he also hailed progress in unblocking some frozen assets, according to him, and lifting some oil sanctions by the American side. Now, he also did say, again, as I mentioned, that Lebanon, or the progress on ending the parallel war in Lebanon, had been made. That was quite substantial, especially that we're continuing to see Israeli hostilities on the southern part of Lebanon, and Hezbollah, the militia backed by Iran, also striking back on the northern part of Israel. So Lebanon has emerged as this massive, again, sticking point to Iran, and progress on that front would be seen positively by the United States and the Iranian side. And Vonnie, just bearing in mind that the start of these talks started at a pretty rocky footing, because President Trump had made threats to Iran before the commencement of these talks, saying that if they don't contain or rein in the highly paid Hezbollah in Lebanon, he's going to have to strike them back. That led the Iranian side, before heading to Switzerland, to say that they've shut down the Strait of Hormuz yet again. But then they continued to go to Switzerland and have these negotiations. They're supposed to continue happening until the end of this week, Vonnie, is what we've heard, again, by the joint statement by Qatar and Iran. And then when it comes to oil and the flowing of those oil barrels through the Strait of Hormuz, what we know from our tanker tracking teams is that we have seen about 8 million barrels across the Strait of Hormuz over Saturday and Sunday. Now that compares to about 20 million barrels per day pre-war levels, but a good trickle down and definitely a step in the positive direction, Vonnie.
Abir, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Abir Abu Omar. Turning to China and trade now, Beijing has placed export restrictions on a couple of rare earths companies, MP Materials and USA Rare Earths, in response to a Pentagon list of firms it says are supporting the Chinese military. Bloomberg's Brendan Murray covers all things trade and joins us now from London. Brendan, why has this reared its head again? Obviously, rare earths is a huge sticking point.
Yeah, exactly. This is the main point of leverage that Beijing has used over the past 12 months to try to sway countries to either comply with what it wants to in the world of trade, or act as an incentive. In this case, the battle is over these rare earth minerals. China has largely slowed those shipments to Japan, for instance, and economies like the European Union are now getting wise to the fact that this is going to come back to bite them if they don't diversify their own supply chain. So what we're hearing from the Chinese is just this latest flare-up of this flashpoint of critical minerals that really affects all countries, and China is trying to, in effect, get everyone on side to say, look, you can diversify all you want, but we are the dominant provider of these products and raw materials for the global economy. And so this is just another way of China showing its strength in this particular area.
And then USTR Jamieson Greer has gone to India trying to revive or at least make some progress on that interim deal. Any sign of anything happening anytime soon?
Yeah, so this U.S.-India trade deal has been the longest in negotiation. Both leaders have consistently said they're optimistic that they can get this over the line, but we've yet to see that happen in about a year of talks. So Jamieson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, is going to India to try to fix those final few bones of contention. They revolve around things like agriculture and things like textile exports from India to make sure that those trade barriers, those tariffs, are low enough for both sides to be able to agree. But there's a lot still left to hammer out, and particularly now that the war in Iran has complicated the geopolitical picture with India and Russian oil, and so it's just about over the line, but they still have a lot of work to do.
All right, Brendan, more work for all of us. That is Brendan Murray, Trade Czar there in London. Coming up, a look at what else is making headlines in your front page news. Will be focused on the resignation of Keir Starmer in Britain. One story dominating your front pages today, and that is the resignation less than an hour ago of Keir Starmer. He will remain Prime Minister until nominations close for a new Labour leader, and that leader takes over by September 1st. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City, 10:30 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Stepping down, the pound weakens as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announces he's resigning. Easing tensions, oil drops as Iran cites major progress after an all-nighter peace talks with the US. And futures wavering ahead of a week full of key economic data and Fed speak. Let's take a look at the markets now. That bond bear flattener still in place today after the FOMC really caused the market to decide that this Fed is going to be more hawkish, even though it's really split down the middle, with the exception of potentially the Fed chair. We don't have his dot, but he is going to remain focused on price stability. That sent the two-year yield rising 13 basis points, another couple of basis points Thursday. We were closed Friday, and we're up once again today. We're up across the board, though, but we're still pretty subdued at the long end. 492.04, a long way from our highs of the year. Perhaps not so much at the short end. Let's take a look at oil, because we are below $80 a barrel, but we're a few bucks higher than we were middle of last week. We had a bit of a difficult weekend, although parties from Iran to the United States coming out positively at the end of the weekend, and some tankers getting through the strait. Brent crude still below 80. It is also below about 78 if you look further out. And WTI is around 75 and change. And then in terms of futures, we had that blistering rally for the SOX in particular on Thursday. It was up 6.5%, the Philly Semiconductor Index. We'll see what happens today, because we did have a global sell-off on Friday. Right now, the NASDAQ futures look like they're pointed higher, although they're pretty flat. A lot of turmoil. And we also have Mike Wilson today warning about equity market risks from thinning liquidity, saying that that's more of a threat at the moment than potential interest rate hikes. That's Mike Wilson, of course, of Morgan Stanley. A lot happening today, though. Let's get to some individual movers first. There's Chloe Melly in London.
Good morning, Bonnie. We're starting the week with some really big movers this morning. And so Getty Images is up almost 200% in pre-market trading this morning after announcing a display partnership with OpenAI, which essentially means that the licensed content from Getty Images will be available within ChatGPT to allow for more visual responses from the chatbot. And so this is really driving those shares, this partnership this morning. Moving on to Apogee Therapeutics, a biotech company that is also up very strongly this morning, more than 54%, almost 55%, after the FT reported that the pharmaceutical giant AbbVie was nearing a deal to buy this company for almost $11 billion to gain access to its anti-inflammatory portfolio. And so this is, of course, as we can see, really driving the shares this morning. And finally, we've got another M&A story in the building materials supplier CRH, which is Ireland-based but also listed in the US, nearing a deal, closing in on a deal to buy acquire its rival Arcosa in what would be one of its biggest ever acquisition for CRH. And so we are seeing that reflected in those Arcosa shares this morning, up about 12% in pre-market trading.
Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there in London. And we're staying there because Prime Minister Keir Starmer has resigned after 2 years in the post.
The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. I have heard the answer of my parliamentary party to that question, and I accept that answer with good grace. Every decision I've taken has been about putting the country I love first. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party.
Staying on in a transition capacity until a contest is decided September 1st. And joining us now from London is Bloomberg's Ruth David. No reaction in gilts, Ruth, and a very small reaction in the pound. You could argue that markets were anticipating this, but there's also the other interpretation, right, that any next successor, and it looks like it could be Andy Burnham, won't be able to do too much different as long as they want to remain head of the Labour Party.
All eyes on the King of the North, right? And what a stunning reversal for Keir Starmer, who in 2024 came to power with such a strong majority for the Labour Party. I think you're right, Wani, that we're not seeing the reaction in gilts and pounds because they've factored in so much of this. And keeping in mind that this is a country that will now be on its 7th leader in a decade. But I think what is going to make a big difference is how neat is this transition process going to be? You know, will it be a coronation? Will it be a contest? There's been talk in the UK about West Streeting potentially posing a leadership challenge, but does he have the 81 MPs that are needed to actually do so? Markets do not like uncertainty. And if there is a sense that, you know, Andy Burnham's route to power is not going to be that smooth, or if there is more commentary that puts him firmly in left of the center, that would also make a big impact. So today it seems like the markets are in a bit of a wait and watch mood.
What's the future for Rachel Reeves and for her policies, Ruth?
Rachel Reeves has been very, very quiet in the last week. And, you know, there has been talk that because Starmer was somebody who has supported her so much, but she hasn't said anything at all. It does not seem like she is going to be the next chancellor. I mean, based on all that we're hearing, one of the names that keeps coming up is Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, but he is seen again as someone, you know, more left of the party, and there is a sense that investors might not be as comfortable with him. I mean, people have also spoken about Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood. I think markets will be very closely watching to see who is the chancellor and do they care as much about fiscal rules as Rachel Reeves, because despite what Reeves did in terms of the national insurance, in terms of the wealth tax, there was a sense among investors that they liked her because she kept saying that she's going to stick to the UK's fiscal rules. And this is at a time when the UK's cost of servicing its debt is at the highest it's been in 6 years. So there is a lot of fiscal and inflationary pressure that is going to constrain whoever comes into that position of the Chancellor, which is going to be very, very closely watched.
Absolutely, and we still don't really know what Andy Burnham's positions are on any of this policy, foreign policy either. Ruth, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Ruth David. Joining us now is Monica Defend, head of the Amundi Investment Institute. Monica, obviously I want to get to the Fed. That was the huge story before this, right? And the change of outlook potentially for monetary policy in the United States. But I have to get your reaction to the resignation beyond a transition period of Keir Starmer. Does it mean anything for your investments in and around Britain?
Well, we really think this was largely expected by the markets, and this is why we justify the containment in volatility. With that in mind, possibly we might see some volatility materializing in the future. However, we keep the idea that there is still value on the gilt, in particular on the 10-year. So this is how we are positioned for now. While on the sterling, we are expecting, going medium term, let's say, some recovery. But again, some volatility might be there for the time being.
And Monica, does it matter who the next PM is, or is that thesis just based on the fact that Keir Starmer is out?
Well, we truly believe that the real story is one of fiscal discipline in the UK. So there are no really many degrees of freedom given the fiscal conditions of the country and the growth in inflation combination. So fiscal will be really the game changer, and the posture on the next leader will indicate the way forward.
Monica, back to last week in the FOMC meeting. How much of a surprise to you was it that 9 members of the committee are potentially more hawkish than we would have thought? That definitely it's a more hawkish committee, and that's before we even get to the Fed chair, who is laser focused, it appears, on price stability, and price stability mainly.
Well, when it goes to the statement on the overall impression we had, on one side, Walsh might sound hawkish, but on the other, the fact that the dot plots are kind of diluted in meaning eventually led us to maintain our call for the Fed staying on hold for a prolonged period of time, notably 2026. Let's see. However, what we see is on the cost pillar, intended in the broader sense, PPI from the input prices, intermediate goods and final goods. This is high, it's incredibly high. And we ask ourselves for how long the corporate sector can absorb it, because it has not been transferred yet to core prices, because eventually this might wait on the margins, compressing margins. So with the situation, the geopolitical situation remaining predominant and potentially lower oil prices, maybe we can see tempered inflation, but inflation is not tame.
Yeah, and I mean, what would we have to see in order for all of the members that are even more hawkish? So one member sees 3 hikes this year, 5 see 2. Obviously, you guys at the moment don't see any. So what would it take to change those minds? That's 4, that's actually 6 members of the Federal Reserve, never mind the 3 that see 1 hike.
The labor market. So the reason why we see this on hold position is because we are cautious on the labor market, where we see material risk mounting, building. So that would be the key variable in our mind.
Monica, how do you position for that? Were you ready for the bear flattening that we saw? I mean, we're at 27 basis points on the 2-10 spread, and do spreads continue to narrow? How does the yield curve reflect what's happening at the Federal Reserve and this change in regime, basically?
Well, actually, we have this medium-term view of a bull steepening of the curve. So this is something we are started to considering. For now, we've been positioning on the 5 years just because on the uncertainty pending on the monetary policy front, we see the short end of the curve less clean. So 5 year for now, and position for our 210 steepening in the future.
Can I ask you about Mike Wilson of Morgan Stanley's call today that, and his team obviously, that equity markets are facing a bigger risk from thinning liquidity than potential interest rate hikes? Are you concerned about liquidity?
Yes, actually, this is something that we are monitoring on a tactical basis. And actually, there has been, for example, last week, rebuilding of non-reserve deposit at the central bank, at the Fed, and similarly the cash account. So actually, we have seen some liquidity reduction that is really calling us for staying invested, but with protection, including the fact that usually when we go and we enter the summer season in August, liquidity usually becomes thin. So what the position we hold for now is the one of being invested, because we can stay out of the market. not invested in the broad beta market, but selection at sector level. And I'm thinking about financials, I'm thinking about industrials, for example, or communication services when it goes to the US, but having hedges in place.
All right, adding hedges. Monica, we'll have to find out about those hedges next time. Monica Defend is head of the Amundi Investment Institute, and we appreciate your time. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. A heatwave gripping Western Europe is forecast to strengthen this week. Record-breaking temperatures expected in France, the UK, Spain and Germany. The heat, driven by a high-pressure heat dome and supported by a developing El Niño, has caused widespread disruptions, with school closures in France and a World Cup viewing party actually cancelled in Spain. Nomura raised the pay of its CEO by 36% in the last fiscal year after profit hit records. According to a filing, his pay rose to $10 million in the year ended March. Still, his pay lags peers. Goldman Sachs' David Solomon received $47 million in 2025. Sergio Ermotti of UBS earned $18 million. Private equity fund investors are expecting more so-called zombie funds in their portfolios as deal-making remains muted. According to a survey by secondaries firm Collar Capital, more than half of investors say they expect zombie funds to proliferate in the next 2 years. That's compared to 28% of investors back in 2024. This is your picture as we head into the Monday session. After a long weekend here in the United States, we have a bit of a bifurcation. S&P futures pointed lower. NASDAQ 100 futures, they haven't made up their mind yet. We do have the dollar index strengthening, the yen approaching 162, the 10-year yield up 3 basis points. We see that across the curve, 448.69. Coming up, Tehran touts major progress in peace talks with Washington. More on Vice President Vance's trip to Switzerland next. This is Bloomberg.
This is the immediate opening of the Straits of Hormuz and, of course, the lifting of the naval blockade that we've had on Iran along with it. The number two thing that it means is that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, and not just pursue a nuclear weapon, but procure or try to buy a nuclear weapon as well. That's built into this agreement.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance yesterday as U.S.-Iran peace talks inch along, as he said. Iranian officials say there is progress in negotiations, but this weekend Tehran flexed its regional power by declaring the Strait of Hormuz shut. As you can see, Foreign Minister Arakchi posted tireless Pakistan and Qatari mediation has delivered major progress to end the Lebanon war. Joining us from Washington is Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska. So what's happening, Kasia? We know that a few tankers have made it through, but there was a stoppage again. Iran at least declared that this strait was closed. What happens next?
US and Iran have 2 months, 60 days, to reach the final agreement over Iran's nuclear program. And so that's why the talks started over the weekend. As you mentioned, the start of the talks was kind of confusing, with Iran being upset about Israel and Hezbollah fighting in Lebanon and threatening to close Hormuz, to which President Trump immediately responded from Washington, saying that the U.S. can also start charging tolls on Hormuz and, in fact, can invade Iran again. But eventually the talks did start over the weekend, with U.S. being represented by Vice President J.D. Vance. And the initial readout, at least from Iran's side, was positive. The Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister praised progress. Iran is very happy because the U.S. promised to deliver significant economic relief, particularly waivers on Iranian oil that would allow the country to sell its energy products, which would in turn bring a lot of revenue. Iran is also hoping to see some of its assets being unfrozen and it being able to use them. So we'll see. We know that the technical groups are supposed to continue the talks in Switzerland this week. That's obviously good news. But President Trump has stayed quiet so far today, so we'll have to wait for his reaction. I know that he has 2 policy meetings at the White House later today.
2 policy meetings. Also, of course, the focus is on, domestic politics with the midterms just more than 4 months away, and apparently Democrats are going to try and make corruption a major midterm campaign issue. Why should voters care now, Kasia, given that corruption has been sort of in the background this whole time?
Democrats are hoping to get back the control of House and Senate in November, but that is going to be tricky. A lot of those races are projected to be very close. So Democrats are zooming in on two issues. One of them is affordability, with gasoline prices still being elevated, but the other one is this concern over corruption, especially around Trump and his family, who clearly are enriching themselves while Trump is in the office. His wealth has surged. We've seen him receiving a gift from Qatari, a new plane that he will use as an Air Force One. Previously, he also announced this new fund that would potentially benefit his political allies. Republicans are concerned too. That's why they stopped this $1.8 billion fund. But they do realize that voters don't like people in power enriching themselves and seeking their own financial gain while being in the office.
All right, we'll see if it works for the Democrats. Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska, thank you. Oil declining slightly this morning on signs of progress in the US-Iran peace talks. US Energy Secretary Chris Wright joining ABC News to discuss prices.
Flows of oil and natural gas through the Straits have already returned to normal, and they will continue that way, whatever happens with the negotiations with the Iranians. We've got growing American production, surging production in Venezuela. We've got cooperation with all the other energy producers of the world. So I think Americans can expect continued declines in energy prices.
Bloomberg's Julian Lee joins us now. Julian, we know that 20 or so tankers went through the Strait, but then that number fell off again. How much oil is getting freed up?
Well, certainly not anything like we used to see before this war started. I mean, flows through Hormuz are anything but normal. Yes, they've picked up a bit from the very low levels we've seen over the last month or two, but there's still vast amounts of oil that's stuck. Saudi Arabia probably has in excess of 30 million barrels of crude that it loaded onto tankers in February and early March that still haven't been able to get out of the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, Iran has been able to export a similar amount that it had on tankers that were all anchored at a port close to its border with Pakistan. So they've been the real big winners out of this so far. We are seeing tankers coming out. We're seeing maybe 4 or 5 tankers a day, so sort of 8 to 10 million barrels a day that we're seeing over the last couple of days. But that compares with sort of 15 million barrels a day that we saw before the war. So there's still a long way to go. And there's a lot of owners who are still very wary about taking their tankers through the waterway.
And in fact, the Chubb CEO said transit security through Hormuz is actually an hour-to-hour play. So the people on the ground or in the water, as it were, are experiencing it very differently. Julian, if we do see, a massive uptick in the amount of oil coming out, do prices decline further, or are we already at best case scenario for prices?
Well, I think if we see flows getting back anywhere near normal levels, and if there's a sense of things settling down and that will continue, we may see more downward pressure on prices. But there's a huge amount of uncertainty still. Certainly, once this 60-day period comes to an end, will Iran impose tolls? Will they control flows? At the moment, it's all very much up in the air.
Julian, thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Julian Lee. Your trading week and what's in it coming up next. This is Bloomberg.